we are going to turn our attention to another big story this week, changes to the rules around migration. So as well as making a flying visit to Rwanda to sign a new treaty to deal with illegal migration, the Home Secretary James Cleverly announced changes to the visa system for those coming here legally. From next spring, a large proportion of those who want to come and work in the UK will need to earn almost £40,000. That's a 50% increase, and there will be tighter restrictions on bringing spouses and children. So what will the impact of all of this be here in Scotland? Dr. Rebecca Kay is a Senior Researcher at Migration Policy Scotland, and she joins us now. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Kay. So I guess first things first, does Scotland have different needs compared to the rest of the UK when it comes to migration, in your view?
Yes, I think Scotland does, or certainly it has a kind of different starting point and a different perspective on migration than some other parts of the UK. So if we look at the fact that we've seen sustained now high numbers of net migration for some time, and this runs against a consistent view from Westminster that numbers need to come down, and one that's increasingly politicised in the run-up to a general election, then it's not surprising probably that the government has announced measures, although obviously some of the details are perhaps different to what might have been expected. But from Scotland's perspective, proportionally to the size of Scotland's economy and the size of its population within the UK, Scotland's actually not receiving as many migrants as other parts of the country.
Why is that?
Well, it's really hard to figure out exactly why it is. There are various theories around why it is. It could be to do with the different way in which the Scotland's economy is set up and the different size of employers in Scotland. It could be to do with a lack of the larger migrant networks that we see in other parts of the UK that draw more migrants into places that are already more diverse than Scotland is. So we don't know exactly why. We do know that lots of people came to Scotland under free movement, and that gathered a momentum, and that Scotland has struggled really with the new migration system, that even though it's bringing more people to the UK as a whole, the percentage that one might expect to see coming to Scotland isn't coming in, although there is an ongoing increase in migration to Scotland, and migration to Scotland has increased quite significantly over the last 2 decades.
Just to quickly ask about the changes that the Home Secretary's introduced, he says it will lead to 300,000 fewer people a year coming to the UK. Should we assume that means fewer migrants therefore making their way to Scotland and working here?
Well, it's likely also to have an impact on people coming to Scotland, yes. Although we don't know, and we never do know. I mean, it's one of the constant conundrums in this policy space is that governments make changes, they introduce measures that they hope will impact on migration flows in particular ways, and that's not always what happens. It's one reason why perhaps setting targets can be a little bit unwise. But what we can see from a Scottish perspective is that the Scottish government, and it's backed by a broader cross-party consensus in this, wants to encourage more people to come to Scotland and, importantly, to settle here. So from Scotland's perspective, migration is seen as important, not just for workforce, not just for the fact that people come and do jobs that need to be done, but also that it brings people, and particularly potentially to parts of Scotland that are struggling with population decline and population ageing.
What do you say to the people who though do look at the numbers? Net migration last year of 745,000, a record. You know, that's a large city in a single year essentially coming to the UK. And what do you say to people who say our public services simply can't cope with that?
Well, from a Scottish perspective, what we see in lots of places is that public services can't cope without people to come to do jobs where there are vacancies and where there are difficulties recruiting people. As I say, there isn't the really high numbers that we're seeing in some parts of the UK probably aren't, for the most part, coming into Scotland, even into Scottish cities. We did do attitudinal research in Migration Policy Scotland at the start of this year, so before the most recent numbers were out, but where we were already seeing a significant rise in migrant numbers to the UK. And we found that within the Scottish public, there were much smaller percentages of people wanting to see migration numbers coming down. So only 28% of the over 1,000 people involved in our survey said that they wanted the number of migrants coming to Scotland to go down, whilst 38% wanted an increase and 34% wanted numbers to stay around the same. We also found a majority of people agreeing with the idea that migration helps to fill jobs where there are labour shortages, and also that it brings people to parts of Scotland that need them. And also significantly, there was a strong preference for labour migration, which allows people to settle and integrate in the longer term. And I think that this is perhaps where the new measures that are being suggested might be particularly significant for Scotland.
Dr.
So
Rebecca Kay, we're going to have to leave it there because sadly we're out of time, but I'm sure we will be revisiting this issue as we head towards the next election. Dr. Rebecca Kay there from Migration Policy Scotland, thank you very much for joining us.